It's taken me a long time to be able to talk about this. For months, I was sure I was the one who was wrong. I thought I was losing my mind, seeing things that weren't there. Everyone behaved as if it was all normal. And when everyone acts like something is normal, you start to believe it. But I knew, deep down, I knew something was wrong. My name is Diana. I'm 45 years old. I've worked as a hotel maid for most of my adult life. The last 10 years I've been at this hotel. I'm good at my job. I'm disciplined, I'm thorough, and most importantly, I'm invisible. That's the main rule you learn in a place like this. You don't see, you don't hear, you don't speak. You just do your work. Your job is to clean the room, make it perfect, and then disappear before the guest even knows you were there. Staying invisible keeps you safe. It keeps you employed. I spent years learning how to do it perfectly. This hotel isn't like other places. It's high-end. The kind of place where some guests don't just stay for a night or two. They live here. We have a name for them internally. VIPs, long-term residents. Management is very clear about these guests. They are not to be disturbed. Their requests are not to be questioned. Whatever they want, they get. It's just how things are. We were all trained to see their demands as reasonable, even when they weren't. It was part of the job. You adapt. You don't complain. You protect the hotel's reputation at all costs. That was the world I worked in, a world with its own set of rules. And then I was assigned to Mr. Barnes, Gregory Barnes. He was in the penthouse suite. He'd been living there for more than a year. He was the ultimate VIP guest, the one everyone knew about, the one everyone was careful around. When my supervisor, Maria, told me I was being moved to the top floor, she presented it as a promotion, a sign of trust. She told me Mr. Barnes was an important client. She used that specific phrase. Important client. It was a code. It meant his rules were the only ones that mattered. At first, his requests seemed odd, but not alarming, just very, very specific. The first thing I noticed was the towels. They had to be folded in a particular way, not the standard hotel fold. It was a complicated 3-part fold I'd never seen before. I had to be shown how to do it by the maid who had his room before me. She did it quickly without looking at me. She didn't say a word about it. Then there were the water bottles on the counter in the main living area. There had to be exactly 6 of them, lined up in a perfectly straight row with the labels all facing forward. If one was even slightly out of line, it was wrong. And my cleaning schedule. I was only allowed to enter the suite between 3:15 p.m. and 4 p.m. Not a minute before, not a minute after. If I was running late from another room, it didn't matter. I had to wait. These were the first things, the little things. I remember asking Maria about the towel fold just once. I tried to make it sound like a casual question. She just gave me a tight little smile. She told me that guests at his level often have particular preferences. She used the word preferences. She said it was normal for them. She told me to just do it exactly as instructed and to keep Mr. Barnes happy. That was my only job. So I did. I learned the fold. I measured the space between the water bottles with my eyes. I watched the clock obsessively. I thought, okay, he's eccentric. Rich people can be eccentric. Everyone else on the staff acted the same way. I'd hear the room service waiters talking. They'd mention how Mr. Barnes required his meals to be placed on a specific spot on the table. Always the same spot. They didn't sound concerned. They almost sounded amused, like it was a funny story, a quirk. It was just Mr. Barnes being Mr. Barnes. No one seemed to think it was strange. No one seemed to feel the weird pressure that I did. Because to me, it didn't feel like a quirk. It felt like a test. Every day, it felt like I was being tested. Could I follow the rules? Could I be perfect? There was a feeling in that suite. A heavy kind of quiet. I would do my work, my hands would be moving, but my stomach would be in knots. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I was overthinking it. This was a good job and I couldn't afford to lose it. So I pushed the feeling down. I told myself to be more like the others, to see it as normal. I just had to be invisible, do the work, don't think. I thought that would be enough to protect me. It wasn't. The requests started to change. They started to get more personal. It wasn't about the room anymore. It was about me. It started with a note. One afternoon, I went into the suite at 3:15, just like always. There was a note on the kitchen counter right next to the line of water bottles. It was on hotel stationery. The handwriting was very neat. The note said that from now on, I was to leave my cleaning cart outside the suite door. I was to bring my supplies in by hand. It said the cart was an intrusion. My cart holds everything. My cloths, my cleaning solutions, the vacuum, the fresh linens. Carrying it all by hand would be difficult and slow. It would take me twice as long. It would break all the hotel's standard procedures for efficiency and hygiene. I stood there, holding that piece of paper. I felt a coldness spread through me. This wasn't about a preference. This was about control. It was about making my job harder for no reason. I took the note to Maria. I didn't say I was upset. I just showed it to her and asked what I should do. I expected her to be surprised. I expected her to say it was an unreasonable request. She read the note. She didn't even pause. She just nodded and handed it back to me. She told me that if that's what Mr. Barnes wanted, then that's what I would do. She said to consider it a new part of his service plan. A service plan, that's what she called it. She told me to just be more efficient with my time. She suggested I bring the supplies in using a small basket. She was solving a problem that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And she was acting like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't argue. I just said, okay. The next day, I left my cart in the hallway. I loaded up a small basket with my cloths and bottles. I had to make 3 trips back and forth to get everything I needed. It was clumsy. It was inefficient. I felt exposed in the hallway going back and forth, but I did it. And when I went into the suite, there was another note. It was in the same place, same neat handwriting. This one was about my uniform. It said my shoes made too much noise on the floor. It suggested I wear softer-soled shoes. The hotel issued us our shoes. They were standard regulation footwear for safety. This request went against a direct hotel policy. I felt that coldness again, but this time it was stronger. He was watching me. He was listening to me. He wasn't even there, but he was noticing the sound of my shoes. The thought made me feel sick. I didn't take this note to Maria. I knew what she would say. She would find a way to make it seem reasonable. She would tell me to find a solution. I felt completely alone, so I went out after my shift and bought a pair of cheap, soft-soled shoes with my own money. They weren't as comfortable. They probably weren't as safe, but they were quiet, and I wore them every day, only for his room. I'd change into them in the service elevator before I went up to the penthouse floor. It was my secret, my little act of compliance. I thought maybe if I just did this, if I gave in, it would stop. He would be satisfied. The test would end. I was so wrong. The notes kept coming, once or twice a week. One note said I was not to run the vacuum cleaner. I was to spot clean the floor by hand if needed. The suite was huge. Not vacuuming was unsanitary. It was against every rule of housekeeping I had ever learned. But I did it. I got on my hands and knees and I spot cleaned. Another note told me to stop using a certain cleaning spray. It said he didn't like the smell, but he wasn't there. He was never there when I cleaned. How could he know what it smelled like? Was he coming back to the room after I left just to check, to smell the air? The thought was deeply unsettling. I started to feel a constant sense of dread on the days I had to clean his suite. I would feel it in the morning when I woke up, a knot in my stomach that just got tighter and tighter as 3:15 p.m. approached. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. One little mistake, one wrong move, and I would fall. I tried to talk to one of the other maids, a younger woman named Sophia. I didn't tell her everything. I just mentioned that Mr. Barnes had a lot of specific rules. She just laughed. She said, "Oh yeah, the king in his castle." That's what some of the staff called him. She told me the guy who had the room before me quit because he couldn't handle it. She said he was too sensitive. She didn't see it as a problem with Mr. Barnes. She saw it as a problem with the employee. Her reaction made me feel even more isolated. If I complained, they would just think I was too sensitive. They would think I couldn't handle the pressure of a VIP guest. It would be my fault, not his. So I stopped talking. I just kept my head down. I bought the different cleaning spray, the unscented kind. I paid for it myself. I kept everything secret. My quiet shoes, my special cleaning supplies, the time I spent on my hands and knees cleaning the floor. It was like I had a second job with a second set of secret rules that only applied in that one suite. And then the request came that crossed the line for me. It was another note. Same place, same neat writing. It said that he had noticed my hair was often tied back in a clip. It said he found the clip to be distracting. And then it said he would prefer it if I wore my hair down when I was in his suite. I read the note 3 times. My hands were shaking. This wasn't about towels or cleaning supplies anymore. This wasn't about the room. This was about my body, my appearance. He wanted me to change how I looked. For him, there was no practical reason for this. Wearing my hair down would be less hygienic, less professional. Hair could fall out. It was against all health and safety standards. It was a completely inappropriate request. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was not normal. This was wrong. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just fear, it was anger. I folded the note, put it in my pocket, and I walked out of the suite. I didn't finish my work. I didn't care. I went straight to Maria's office. I was still shaking. I walked in and I put the note on her desk. I watched her face as she read it. I waited for the shock, the outrage, the apology. I waited for her to say, "This has gone too far." But that's not what happened. She read the note and her expression didn't change. There was no surprise. She put the note down. She looked at me. And she asked me if my hair was long enough to be a problem. She wasn't focused on the request. She was focused on my compliance. She was already trying to figure out how to make it work, how to normalize this too. I just stared at her. I couldn't speak. She sighed, a little impatient sigh. She told me that Mr. Barnes was an eccentric man and that sometimes their VIPs make unusual requests. She said it was probably just an aesthetic preference. Aesthetic preference? And that's the term she used. She suggested that maybe I could just take my hair down right before I enter his suite and then put it back up when I leave. She was giving me a solution, a way to obey. I finally found my voice. It was quiet, but it was steady. I told her I wasn't comfortable with it. I told her it was inappropriate. The moment I said the word inappropriate, her whole demeanor changed. Her face hardened. The helpful problem-solving expression was gone. She told me I was overreacting. She told me that I was lucky to have the top floor assignment and that I shouldn't jeopardize it by being difficult. She said the hotel had a long and valuable relationship with Mr. Barnes. And then she said the sentence that I will never forget. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Diana, don't make this a problem." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. A problem for who? Not for him. A problem for me. I was the problem. My discomfort was the problem. I understood in that moment no one was going to help me. The system wasn't just ignoring the issue. The system was designed to protect him and to silence me. I was completely and utterly on my own. I picked up the note from her desk. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked out of her office. I went to the staff locker room. I sat on a bench and I just sat there for a long time. I felt hollowed out. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was this heavy, empty feeling. I had done everything right. I had been quiet. I had been invisible. I had complied with every single strange request. And it hadn't protected me. It had only made it worse. It had taught him that he could ask for anything and I would do it. And it had taught management that I was compliant, that I wouldn't cause trouble. My silence had been interpreted as agreement. I thought about quitting, just walking out and never coming back. But I couldn't. I needed this job. I have bills to pay. I have my life. It's not that easy. I felt trapped. I had two choices. I could do what she said. I could take my hair down. I could let this man, this stranger, dictate my appearance. I could swallow my own feelings and just keep going, or I could say no. But saying no was terrifying. Maria had made it clear what would happen. I would be seen as the problem. I'd be labeled as difficult, uncooperative. I would probably lose my job. I sat there in that empty locker room, and I felt like I was shrinking. Every request he had made, every time someone told me it was normal, had been a small chip away at my sense of self. And now there was almost nothing left. The next day I went to work. I didn't know what I was going to do. My stomach was in a permanent knot. I did my other rooms. I was on autopilot. I just kept thinking about 3:15 p.m. I kept thinking about the note in my pocket. When the time came, I went up in the service elevator. I had my little basket of supplies. I was wearing my quiet shoes. I stood outside the door to the penthouse suite. I thought about his request, about my hair, and I thought about Maria's threat. And I realized something. If I gave in on this, there would be another request, and another after that. Where would it end? What would he ask for next? That thought scared me more than losing my job. So I made a decision. I took a deep breath. I did not take my hair down. My clip was still firmly in place. And I walked into the suite. The air felt different. Charged. I knew he would know. I didn't know how, but I knew. I started my work. I tried to be calm. I tried to just focus on the tasks. But my heart was pounding. I was cleaning in the main area when I noticed it. On a small table, near a window, was a little object that wasn't usually there. It was a small digital photo frame, the kind that cycles through pictures. It was turned on. I wouldn't have paid any attention to it. It wasn't my business. But as I got closer, the picture on the screen changed, and I stopped. The picture was of me. It was a photo of me in the suite, cleaning, taken from a hidden angle. I was on my hands and knees, spot cleaning the floor, just like he had instructed. My back was to the camera. I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't breathe. The picture changed again. It was another one of me. This time I was at my cart out in the hallway from a few weeks ago. Before the note about the cart, the photo was taken from inside the suite, through the little peephole in the door. He had been watching me. He had been photographing me. The picture changed again. And again, they were all of me, in the suite, in the hallway, working, unaware. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just a request. This wasn't a quirk. This was something else entirely, something dark and violating. I backed away from the table. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. A new picture came up. It was a close-up of the back of my head, of my hair clip, the one he said was distracting. And I understood. The notes weren't just tests, they were a game. He was making me do things, and then he was taking pictures. He was documenting it. My compliance was his entertainment. I grabbed my basket of supplies and I ran. I left the suite. I left the door unlocked. I didn't care. I ran down the hallway to the service elevator and I just kept pressing the button. I felt like I was being watched from every peephole, every doorway. When I got to the ground floor, I didn't go to the locker room. I didn't go to Maria's office. I went straight to the main hotel lobby. It was busy. There were guests checking in, people talking. I saw the hotel manager, Mr. Davies, standing near the front desk. I had never spoken to him directly before. He was like a phantom. You knew he existed, but you never interacted with him. I walked straight up to him. My uniform was probably a mess. I was breathing hard. I know I must have looked frantic. People were staring at me. A maid wasn't supposed to be in the main lobby, let alone approaching the general manager. I didn't care. I didn't even know what I was going to say. The words just came out. I told him there was a problem in the penthouse suite. I told him he needed to come with me right now. He looked at me with this confused, annoyed expression. He started to dismiss me, to tell me to talk to my supervisor. But I didn't let him. I said the name. I said, it's about Mr. Barnes. And I said, there are cameras. The moment I said that, his whole expression changed. The annoyance vanished. He looked around the lobby. He saw that people were watching us. He gave me a very slight nod. He told me to wait for him by the staff entrance. His voice was low and urgent. I went and I waited. I was trembling so hard I had to lean against a wall. A few minutes later, he appeared, along with the head of security. They didn't ask me many questions. They just told me to take them to the suite. We went up in the guest elevator, not the service one. It was silent. I used my master key to open the door to the penthouse. I was terrified that the photo frame would be gone, that he had somehow come back and removed it, that I would look like I was crazy. But it was still there, on the table, still cycling through the pictures of me. I just pointed at it. Mr. Davies and the head of security walked over to it. They stood there for a long time, just watching the screen. I watched their faces. I saw the moment the professional mask slipped. I saw the shock. I saw the dawning horror. They saw the picture of me on my knees. They saw the pictures taken through the peephole. They saw the close-up of my hair clip. No one spoke. The head of security finally picked up the frame. He turned it over in his hands. Then he spoke into his radio. His voice was very quiet. Mr. Davies turned to me. His face was pale. He looked at me, and for the first time, he looked at me like I was a person, not just a part of the staff. He asked me to come down to his office. He said, and we need to talk about this. And in his voice, I heard it, the shift. The problem was no longer me. The problem was Mr. Barnes. The silence in Mr. Davies' office was heavier than any quiet I'd ever known. It wasn't the empty quiet of the penthouse. This was a thick, suffocating silence, filled with the images still cycling on the digital frame, sitting on his polished mahogany desk. A picture of me on my hands and knees wiping the floor. A picture of my hair, down, fanned out over my shoulders. A picture of my hands, carefully aligning the water bottles. Mr. Davies stared at it. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His entire focus was on this small, glowing screen. The mask of the polished hotel manager, the one that was all smooth reassurances and practiced calm, had cracked. For a second, I saw just a man, a horrified man. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He finally looked up, and his eyes met mine. The condescension was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. "Diana," he said, his voice low and strained. "How long?" The strange note started when I was assigned the suite. 3 weeks ago, I said. My own voice sounded distant, like it was coming from across the room. "The photos. I don't know. I just found this today." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. He looked out over the city, but I knew he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing the liability, the lawsuit, the scandal. I had worked in this world long enough to know how men like him thought. But then he turned back, and the look on his face wasn't just about the hotel, it was about me. "You went to your supervisor?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation, it was a confirmation. "Yes, Maria." The name felt like a stone in my mouth. I told her I was uncomfortable, especially today with the note about my hair. She told me not to make it a problem. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He walked back to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Maria, my office." "Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The command was absolute. We waited in that thick silence again. I watched the screen. Click. A photo of me from behind, reaching up to dust a light fixture. Click. A close-up of the cheap hotel-issued shoes I had been forced to wear. Click. My face looking tired and anxious as I reread one of the notes. He had been watching my face. He had been documenting my distress. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. This wasn't just about control, it was about enjoyment. He was enjoying this. The door opened and Maria walked in, a bright professional smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Davies, you needed me." Her eyes flicked from him to me, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flash of annoyance. I wasn't supposed to be here, I had gone over her head. Then she saw the photo frame on his desk. The blood drained from her face. The practiced smile didn't just falter, it died, leaving her mouth slightly agape. She stared at the picture of me on my knees, a rag in my hand, my hair falling over my face. The picture he must have taken right after I'd given in to his last demand. The picture that proved I was telling the truth. "Maria," Mr. Davis said, his voice dangerously soft. "Sit down." She stumbled into the chair beside me, her movements jerky. She couldn't take her eyes off the screen. "Diana has brought a serious matter to my attention," he continued, his gaze fixed on Maria. "She reported a guest's escalating an inappropriate request to you. She told you she was uncomfortable. She told you a guest was demanding she alter her personal appearance." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And you told her not to make it a problem." Maria opened her mouth and closed it. The corporate jargon, the smooth deflections, they were all gone. She had no words. "You called his demands preferences," Mr. Davis said, picking up the frame and turning it so it directly faced her. "Is this a preference, Maria? Is documenting my staff in humiliating positions an aesthetic choice?" I saw a flicker of the old Maria then, the instinct to protect herself. I had no idea," she stammered. "He's an important client. I was just managing his service plan. I never thought—" "You never thought," Mr. Davies cut her off, his voice like ice. "Your job is to think. Your job is to protect our staff, not our revenue stream. You failed spectacularly." I watched her crumble. The woman who had held my job in her hands, who had dismissed my fear with a wave of her hand, looked small and afraid. I felt a cold wave of satisfaction wash over me. It wasn't a good feeling. It was bitter and sharp, but it was there. It was the grim satisfaction of being proven right. Mr. Davies turned his attention back to me. His tone softened completely. Diana, I am profoundly sorry. What you have experienced is unacceptable. It will be handled. He placed the photo frame in his desk drawer and locked it. The key made a solid final click. You will not return to the penthouse, he said. You will not finish your shift. You are on paid administrative leave, effective immediately. I need you to go home. Go home. The words were a relief, but they also felt like a dismissal, an order to disappear while the problem was managed. What about him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Barnes. Mr. Barnes is no longer a guest at this hotel, Mr. Davies said, his face a grim mask. Security is already on its way to his suite. We will be involving the police. The police. The word sent a new jolt of fear through me. This was real. This was a crime. I need you to write down everything you can remember, he said, sliding a notepad and a pen across the desk toward me. Every note, every request, every time you spoke to Maria, dates if you can. Be as detailed as possible. He looked at Maria, who was still staring at the empty space on the desk where the frame had been. You will wait here. He stood and held the door for me. It was a gesture of respect I had never received from management. As I walked past him, he put a hand gently on my arm. No one will blame you for this, Diana, he said quietly. You did the right thing. I wanted to believe him. I walked through the hushed, carpeted back hallways, the ones reserved for staff, the ones designed to keep us invisible, but I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt exposed like a nerve ending that had been scraped raw. Every person I passed, another maid pushing her cart, a room service waiter hurrying by, seemed to look at me differently. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe it wasn't. I made it to the staff locker room. It was empty. The low hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. I sat on the hard bench in front of my locker, the notepad and pen feeling heavy in my hands. My hands were shaking. I set the pad down and pressed my palms against my thighs, trying to still them. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation in Mr. Davies' office began to fade. In its place, a deep trembling cold settled in my bones. The pictures, they weren't just evidence anymore. They were memories burned into my mind. Me on the floor, me with my hair down, me trapped on a tiny screen for a stranger's private collection. He watched me. He took pictures. He kept them. I had spent my entire career trying to be unseen, to do my job quietly and leave no trace. But he had seen me. He had documented every moment, turning my work, my body into his property. Mr. Davies said I had done the right thing. Maria was facing consequences. The system that had tried to silence me was finally belatedly working. But I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt violated. I sat there in the quiet of the locker room for a long time, the empty notepad on the bench beside me. The validation was real, but it was a hollow, echoing thing. It couldn't erase the truth that now lived inside me. I was right. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The world had gone quiet and blurry. Mr. Davies' voice was a low hum on the phone, the words sharp and angry but muffled, as if I were hearing them from underwater. He was saying things like unacceptable, immediate removal, and police report. My eyes stayed fixed on the digital frame sitting on his polished desk. It was dark now, the screen blank, but the images were burned into my mind. Me bending to pick up a towel, me reaching for a bottle of water, me my hair down, my back to a camera I never knew was there. Each picture was a small, sharp betrayal. Mr. Davies hung up the phone with a sharp click. The sound made me jump. He looked at me, his face pale. The anger he'd shown on the phone was gone, replaced by something that looked like pity. I hated it. Diana, he said, his voice soft, I'm so sorry. I just nodded. I didn't trust my own voice. It felt like if I opened my mouth, a scream would come out that would never stop. Security is on its way to the penthouse now. They will escort Mr. Barnes off the property. The police have been notified and will meet them there to take a statement and secure any evidence. He looked at the dark screen on his desk. We will, of course, cooperate fully. He took a breath. I've also instructed HR to place you on paid administrative leave, effective immediately, for as long as you need. We'll have counseling services available should you want them. He was saying all the right things. The things a good manager should say. It was everything I had hoped for when I walked down here. So why did I feel so empty? The validation was a thin, cold blanket. It covered me, but it didn't make me warm. The violation had gone too deep. It was in my bones. Maria has been suspended pending a full investigation, he added, his voice hardening again. Her failure to act on your reports is inexcusable. I thought of Maria's face, her tight smile, her constant talk of preferences and service plans. She hadn't been evil. She had just been following the rules of the hotel, the ones written in invisible ink. The client is always right, especially when they're rich. She had chosen the hotel over me, over a person. Do you need me to do anything else? I asked. The words came out as a whisper. No, he said quickly. You need to go home, Deanna. Rest. Let me have someone from security walk you to your car. No, thank you, I said a little stronger this time. I can walk myself. It was a small thing, but it was important. I had been watched, recorded, and controlled. The last thing I wanted was another escort, another person shadowing my steps. I needed to walk out of this hotel on my own 2 feet, by myself. He seemed to understand. He nodded slowly. All right, my direct number is on this card. If you think of anything, or if you need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. He pushed a business card across the desk. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. My fingers felt clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. I stood. Thank you, Mr. Davies. No, Diana, he said, his eyes full of a tired sadness. Thank you. You were brave to come forward. I'm sorry we failed you before this. The walk from his office to the staff locker room was the longest walk of my life. The familiar back hallways felt different now, menacing. Every shadow seemed to stretch. Every closed door seemed to hide a lens. I kept my eyes on the floor, on the scuffed gray tiles I had mopped 1,000 times. I felt the phantom weight of eyes on my back. I turned a corner and there she was, Maria. She was standing outside her small office, her handbag clutched in her hands. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red. She saw me and took a half step forward, then stopped. Diana, she started, her voice thin. I had no idea. I thought he was just particular. I stopped and looked at her. I didn't say a word, I just looked. I saw the fear in her eyes, not for me, but for her job, for her future. She was a functionary, a cog in the machine that had ground me up. In that moment, I felt nothing for her. Not anger, not pity, just a vast, empty distance. My silence was louder than any accusation. She flinched and looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I walked past her without another glance. The locker room was empty. The low hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. I opened my locker, number 247, and the familiar sight of my street clothes hanging on the hook felt alien. I took off the uniform, the crisp white blouse, the black pants. I folded them neatly the way I always did, out of a habit I couldn't break. But my movements were stiff, robotic. The uniform wasn't a symbol of pride anymore. It was a costume. The costume of a woman being watched. I put it in the laundry bin. I wanted to burn it. Dressed in my own jeans and sweater, I felt a little more like myself, but not much. I looked in the small smudge mirror on the inside of my locker door. The same tired 45-year-old face looked back at me, but the eyes were different. They were older. They knew something now that they hadn't known this morning. They had seen proof of how invisible you can become, even when you're the only person in a room. I grabbed my purse, shut the locker, and walked out. Through the service corridors, past the clatter of the kitchens, past the rumbling laundry rooms. A world I knew like the back of my hand. A world that no longer felt like mine. The automatic door slid open and I stepped out into the late afternoon air. The city noise hit me. The honk of a taxi, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of people on the sidewalk. It was loud and chaotic and real, but the fresh air didn't clear my head. The relief I thought I would feel wasn't there. He was gone from the hotel, but he had taken something of mine with him, something I could never get back. I usually took the bus home. Today I started walking. I didn't know why, I just knew I couldn't be still. I needed to feel the pavement under my feet, to feel my own legs moving me forward. With every block, the questions started to bubble up, hot and sharp. The pictures, how many were there? How many cameras? Was it just in the living room? Or were they in the bedroom too? The bathroom? My stomach went cold. I had been so careful to be professional, to be invisible. But he had seen me. He had turned my workday into his private show. Where were the pictures now? Mr. Davies had the one frame. But a man like that, a man with that much money and that much time, he would have copies? Of course he would. Were they on a computer, a hard drive? Were they on the internet? The thought hit me like a physical blow. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. A man in a suit bumped into me, muttered an apology, and kept going. I didn't notice. I felt the air leave my lungs, my face, my body, displayed for strangers to see. A permanent record of my humiliation. The police had been called, but what could they do? He was a rich man, a powerful man, the kind of man who made problems disappear. He would have lawyers who would call it a misunderstanding, an issue of security systems he forgot to turn off. They would find a way to make it seem small, normal even. I started walking again, faster this time. The buildings around me felt like they were leaning in, the windows like a million blank eyes. I felt exposed, naked. By the time I reached my small apartment building, my legs ached and a dull headache was pounding behind my eyes. I fumbled with my keys, my hands still shaking. I unlocked the 3 locks on my door, the deadbolt, the chain, the knob, and stepped inside. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, sliding the bolts back into place. Click, click, click. The silence of my own home surrounded me. It was a different kind of quiet from the penthouse. It was a familiar quiet, filled with the hum of my old refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. This was my sanctuary, my safe place. I looked around the small, tidy living room, my clock, my worn-out armchair. But I didn't feel safe. I walked to the window and pulled the curtains shut, plunging the room into twilight. It wasn't enough. I could still feel him. I could feel his gaze. It wasn't in the penthouse suite anymore. It was in my head. He was gone, but he was everywhere. The silence in my own apartment was the first thing that broke me. It used to be my refuge. A quiet place to soak my feet and read a book. The noise of the hotel a distant memory. But now the quiet was different. It was a heavy kind of quiet, the same kind that had filled the penthouse suite. It felt watchful. It felt like his. I was on paid leave. That's what Mr. Davies had called it. He'd been kind, his face a mask of professional concern. He'd promised the hotel would take care of everything. He had used the words full support. I sat on my own couch, but it didn't feel like mine. My gaze kept drifting to the window, to the small gap in the curtains. I felt exposed, even 3 floors up. I got up and pulled them shut, but the darkness didn't help. It only made me feel more trapped. I thought about the pictures. It was a constant loop in my head, more vivid than the digital frame itself. Me on my knees, wiping the floor with a soft cloth. Me lining up the water bottles, my face tight with concentration. Me turning my head, my hair falling over my shoulder, just as the note had requested. He had been watching. The whole time, not just watching, but directing, building a scene. And I had been his unwitting actress. The thought made my skin crawl. A coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the chilly apartment. This was wrong. The thought was so simple, so clear. It was a single, hard stone in the churning mess of my emotions. It was wrong. And I had known it. I had felt it in my gut every time I had to leave my cart in the hall, every time I had to put on those ridiculous shoes. I told Maria. I had tried to make someone listen, but they had all smiled and nodded and told me it was normal. Eccentric, a preference. They used soft words to sandpaper down the jagged edges of what was really happening. They had left me alone in that room with him, not his body, but his presence, his eyes. The knock on my door made me jump so hard I gasped. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in his cage. I froze, standing in the middle of my living room. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Another knock, firmer this time. Ms. Morales, it's Detective Miller, Boston PD. Mr. Davies from the hotel said you'd be expecting me. The police, right. Mr. Davies had called them. My hands were shaking as I undid the deadbolt. I opened the door, just a crack, peering through. A man in a plain rumpled suit stood there, holding up a badge. He looked tired. Ms. Morales? he asked again. His voice was flat, professional. I nodded and opened the door wider. Yes, come in. He stepped inside, his eyes doing a quick practice scan of my small apartment. Thank you. This shouldn't take too long. I just need to get your official statement. I gestured to the small dining table. Please. We sat across from each other. The silence stretched between us. He took out a small notepad and a pen. The pen made a little clicking sound that seemed to echo in the room. So, he began, Mr. Davies gave me the basics. You were a housekeeper assigned to a guest, a Mr. Arthur Barnes. Yes. My voice was a whisper. And you discovered a digital photo frame containing images of you. Yes. He looked up from his notepad. His expression was unreadable. Can you tell me from the beginning about the request Mr. Barnes made? And so I told him. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck as I recounted the list, the towels, the water bottles, leaving my cart, the special shoes I'd bought with my own money, cleaning the floor on my hands and knees. My voice faltered when I got to the last note. He wanted you to wear your hair down? The detective asked, his pen pausing over the paper. Yes. And that's when you decided you couldn't comply. It was too personal, I said, the words feeling weak and insufficient. It was the last straw. He wrote something down. Why didn't you report the other requests sooner, Ms. Morales? When they first started to feel strange. There it was, the question I had been asking myself over and over. The question that made me feel stupid, naive, complicit. I did, I said, my voice gaining a little strength. I reported it to my supervisor, Maria, multiple times. And what was her response? She told me he was an important client. She said they were just preferences. She told me not to make it a problem. My throat felt tight. She made me feel like I was overreacting, like I was the one causing trouble. He nodded slowly, his face giving nothing away. We have her statement as well. Her employment is under review. He asked me about the photo frame. He wanted to know exactly what I saw. I described the images, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. I described the angle, how they seemed to be taken from a high corner in the room, near the ceiling. He was documenting it, I said, the realization hitting me with fresh horror. He wasn't just making me do things. He was keeping a record of it. It appears so, Detective Miller said calmly. We had a forensics team sweep the suite. They found 3 cameras, very small. One in the corner of the main living area, one in the bedroom, and one in the main bathroom. The air left my lungs. The bathroom. I felt sick. I had been so careful to be invisible, to leave no trace. And he had been watching my every move. I wrapped my arms around myself, a useless gesture of protection. Did you ever see Mr. Barnes? He asked. No, never. Just the notes. And the hotel has the photo frame now? Yes, I gave it to Mr. Davies. He clicked his pen again. All right, Ms. Morales, I need to be upfront with you. Mr. Barnes was escorted off the property and his legal team was contacted. He's a very wealthy, very powerful man. I felt a familiar coldness, the one I felt whenever Maria talked about him. What does that mean? I asked. It means this will be a fight. His lawyers are already claiming the cameras were for his own security. They're claiming the photos were an unfortunate automated result of motion activation. They're claiming the notes were simply the eccentricities of a man who values precision. I stared at him. It was happening again. The soft words, the excuses, the gaslighting, but this time with lawyers and legal jargon. But the note about my hair, I said, how is that for security? That's our strongest point, he conceded. The personal nature of the requests, that's where it crosses the line from eccentric to harassment, potentially stalking. He paused. The DA's office will review the case, but I can't make you any promises about the outcome. I felt completely alone. After he left, I walked through my apartment. I checked the lock on the front door for the 3rd time. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch, scanning the street below. I didn't know what I was looking for. A black car, a man, watching my building. It was foolish, but I couldn't stop myself. The violation wasn't just in the hotel suite anymore. It had followed me home. It was in my head. My phone rang later that afternoon. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it anyway. Diana, it's Robert Davies. The general manager. His voice was smooth, confident. I wanted to check in on you and to give you an update. The forensics team confirmed the devices Detective Miller told you about. They've all been removed. We are treating this with the utmost seriousness. Thank you, I managed to say. The hotel would also like to make a therapist available to you at our expense for as long as you need. We have a list of excellent professionals we can recommend. A therapist, a corporate solution to a human problem, a way to manage their liability. The thought was cynical, and I felt a pang of guilt, but I couldn't shake it. I'll think about it, I said, of course. And please don't worry about your position. Your leave is fully paid for as long as it takes. You are a valued member of our team, Diana. What happened to you was unacceptable. His words were all correct. He was doing his job, just like Maria had been doing hers. But his politeness felt like a wall, a professional boundary I couldn't cross. I was still the maid. He was still the manager, and Mr. Barnes was still the millionaire. After we hung up, I stood in my closet. My eyes landed on the box on the top shelf. The box holding the special quiet-soled shoes. The ones I had paid for myself. The ones that had allowed me to move like a ghost through his suite while he watched. I pulled the box down. I opened it and looked at the shoes. They were barely worn. I took them out, walked into the kitchen, and pushed them deep into the trash can. Then I took out the bag of coffee grounds from that morning and dumped it on top of them. I wanted them buried. I wanted them gone. It was a small thing. It didn't fix anything. The cameras had still been there. The photos still existed somewhere on a hard drive or a cloud. A part of my life stolen and stored away. Mr. Barnes was still out there, protected by his money. But as I pushed the trash can back into its corner, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or shame. It was a cold, hard anger. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I was standing on solid ground. He had taken my sense of safety. He had taken my privacy, but I would not let him take anything else. The drive home from the hotel was a blur. Mr. Davies had insisted on calling me a car, a quiet black sedan that felt as sterile and impersonal as the penthouse suite. I sat in the back, my hands clenched in my lap, and watched the city lights smear across the window. Each street lamp felt like an eye. Each passing car held a potential observer. The detective's final words echoed in the silent car. Men like him have ways of making things go away. He hadn't said it to scare me, I don't think. He said it like he was stating a fact, like telling me the sky was blue or that water was wet. It was a rule of the world I was only just now learning. Gregory Barnes had money. He had lawyers. What I had was a memory card full of stolen images and a violation that settled deep in my bones, cold and heavy. My apartment door clicked shut behind me, and the sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet building. For 20 years, this small, one-bedroom apartment had been my sanctuary. It was the place I came to shed the invisibility cloak I wore at the hotel. Here, I was just Diana. I could be tired, I could be messy, I could be real. But it didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. I stood in the middle of my small living room, the one with the worn floral sofa and the bookshelf filled with secondhand paperbacks. The air was thick, stale. I felt the urgent need to open a window, but the thought of the blackness outside looking in stopped me cold. He had watched me. He had taken pictures. I walked over to my laptop, sitting close on the little desk where I paid my bills. With a trembling finger, I traced the tiny pinhole-sized lens of the built-in camera. I had never given it a second thought. I tore a piece of junk mail from the counter and found a roll of tape in a drawer. I taped a scrap of paper over the lens. It was a small, foolish gesture, but it was all I could think to do. The first day of my paid leave was the longest day of my life. My body, so used to the 5 a.m. alarm and the constant motion of a 10-hour shift, didn't know what to do with itself. I woke before the sun, my stomach already in knots. I made coffee, but the taste was bitter, and I poured it down the sink. I turned on the television, but the cheerful morning show host felt like a personal insult. Their world was bright and simple. Mine had been turned inside out. Everything in my apartment seemed to mock me. The digital clock on the microwave, the smoke detector on the ceiling, the small dark screen of the television when it was off. Every object held a new and sinister potential. Every surface could be a lens. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope in my own home. By noon, I hadn't eaten. I hadn't changed out of the sweatpants and t-shirt I'd slept in. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to. It was a heavy kind of quiet, the kind that lets you hear your own heart pounding in your ears, the kind that makes you think you hear the floorboards creak in the hallway. The detective's warning came back to me again. Lawyers are already spinning this. A misunderstanding, an issue with hotel security protocols, an invasion of his privacy. I felt the air leave my lungs. They would try to blame me. Of course they would. Maria had already tried. Don't make this a problem, Diana. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp, something other than fear. It was anger. It burned in my chest. A welcome change from the ice that had been sitting there for days. He had stood in that room, or he had paid someone to, and placed those cameras. He had watched me scrub floors on my hands and knees. He had watched me struggle to reach the high shelves. He had taken a picture of my face, flushed with effort. He had taken a picture of my hair when I had finally let it down. And now his lawyers were going to call it a misunderstanding. The thought propelled me off the sofa. I couldn't just sit here. I couldn't let the fear paralyze me. I started in the living room. I took the framed pictures of my sister's kids off the wall, running my fingers along the cheap cardboard backing, looking for any sign of tampering, any unusual thickness. I found nothing. I pulled the cushions off the sofa. I ran my hands along the seams, feeling for wires, for anything hard and small. Nothing. It was crazy. I knew it was crazy. He had no reason to put cameras in my home. He didn't even know where I lived. Did he? The hotel had my address on file. Mr. Davies had it. The police had it. How hard would it be for a man with his resources to get it? A man who paid for private detectives, who had lawyers on retainer, a man who bought people's compliance. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold through me. The anger vanished, replaced by a raw, primal fear. I was a fly caught in a web I couldn't see. My movements became frantic. I went into the bedroom. My small television, the alarm clock on my nightstand. I unplugged them both, turning them over and over in my hands. I stood on a chair to get a closer look at the smoke detector, my heart hammering against my ribs. It looked normal. It was just a smoke detector. It wasn't. Nothing was just itself anymore. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was a mess. She looked haunted. I saw the small ventilation grate near the ceiling. I saw the tiny red light on the base of my electric toothbrush charger. I saw threats everywhere. I spent over an hour tearing my home apart, my sanctuary. When I was done, I stood in the wreckage of my own life. Cushions on the floor, books pulled from their shelves, clothes pulled from my drawers. I had found nothing, absolutely nothing, and I felt no relief. The absence of proof wasn't proof of absence. He had taught me that. The cameras in the suite had been invisible until the moment they weren't. The threat was invisible too. It lived in the possibility, it lived in my head. He had planted it there, and it was growing like a weed. I sank onto the floor, my back against the sofa, and finally let myself cry. It wasn't a quiet, dignified cry. It was a full-body sob, ugly and gasping. All the fear, the humiliation, the rage, it all came pouring out. I cried for the woman who just wanted to do her job well. I cried for the loss of my simple, quiet life. I cried because I felt completely and utterly alone. When the tears finally stopped, I was just empty. I sat there on the floor for a long time, watching the afternoon light fade outside my taped-up window. The shadows in my living room grew long. And in that emptiness, a single thought took root. This is what he wants. He wants me scared. He wants me hiding in my own home, tearing it apart, doubting my own sanity. He wants me to feel small and powerless. He wants me to be so broken by the fear that I become silent. A silent victim is not a problem. A silent victim lets him get away with it, lets him move on to the next hotel, the next Maid. My crying was done. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't just from fear anymore. It was from something else. Something hard and cold and solid. I stood up on unsteady legs. I walked to my desk and looked at the piece of paper taped over my laptop camera. He had made me afraid of my own reflection, of my own home. He had taken my sense of safety. I wasn't going to let him keep it. Slowly, deliberately, I peeled the tape away. I stared into the tiny black lens. I didn't know if anyone was watching. It didn't matter. This was not for him. This was for me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Detective Miller. I left a message. My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "Detective," I said, "this is Diana Morales. I want to confirm that I will cooperate fully. I will testify. I will do whatever is needed. I am not going away." I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtains, letting the last of the evening light in. The world outside was still full of shadows, but for the first time all day, I wasn't afraid to look. He had started this, but I would be the one to finish it. I hung up the phone. The silence that followed was different from the kind that had been choking me for days. It wasn't the empty, listening silence of the penthouse. It wasn't the frantic, paranoid silence of my own apartment. This was something else. It was heavy. It was the silence after a decision is made. I looked around my living room. The cushions were torn from the sofa, the books pulled from their shelves, the single rug rolled up in the corner. It was a ruin, a mess I had made with my own two hands, searching for an enemy who wasn't there. But the enemy was real. He just wasn't in my walls. My fear hadn't vanished. It was still there, a cold stone in my stomach. But something new was sitting right beside it. A hard, sharp anger. The fear had made me want to hide. The anger made me want to stand up. I walked into the kitchen and put on a kettle for tea. The simple act felt like a statement. I was still here. I was going to have a cup of tea. I was going to put my home back together. And then I was going to go to that police station and tell them everything. My hands were steady as I picked up the first book from the floor. I placed it back on the shelf, then another and another. I worked with the same methodical focus I used to use in my job. Straightening, ordering, cleaning. But this wasn't for a guest. This wasn't for an invisible millionaire or a manager who saw me as a problem to be solved. This was for me. I was reclaiming my space. I thought about Maria, her smooth corporate words. Aesthetic preference. Don't make this a problem. She hadn't just dismissed me. She had tried to make me believe I was the one who was wrong. That my own feelings, my own gut instinct couldn't be trusted. She had been his first line of defense, the one who kept the system running smoothly, so men like Gregory Barnes could do whatever they wanted in the quiet private spaces no one else was allowed to see. Mr. Davies had fired her. The thought brought me no joy, just a grim sense of consequence. She was a casualty of the same system she had protected. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in my uniform, but in my own clothes. A simple pair of black slacks and a gray sweater. I pulled my hair back into its usual tight, neat clip at the base of my neck. It was an act of defiance. This was my hair, my choice. I would not let him take that from me. The police station was a squat brick building that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was the opposite of the hotel. There was no marble, no soft lighting, no illusion of comfort. It was brutally functional, a place for hard facts. A uniformed officer led me to a small windowless room, a metal table, 3 plastic chairs. It felt like a cage. For a moment, the old panic started to rise in my throat. I felt the air grow thin. Then the door opened and Detective Miller came in. He looked tired, older than I remembered from the phone. He gave me a small professional nod. "Mrs. Costa, thank you for coming in. Coffee?" "No, thank you," I said. My voice was tight. "Water?" I nodded. He left and came back with a small paper cup of water, placing it on the table in front of me. It was a simple kindness, but it felt enormous. It was an acknowledgement that I was a person, not just a part of a case file. "I need you to tell me everything," he said, opening a notebook. "From the very beginning. The first day you were assigned to Mr. Barnes's suite. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small you think it is." So I started. I told him about the note, the one about the towels. I described the exact fold, the way the corner had to point toward the door. I told him about the water bottles, the labels all facing forward, spaced precisely 1 inch apart. My voice was flat, reciting the facts as I remembered them. The details that had once made me question my sanity were now my evidence. They were the foundation of my story. He listened without interruption, his pen scratching across the page. I told him about the cart, about being forced to leave it in the hall, about the dozens of trips back and forth, feeling exposed in that long, quiet corridor. I told him about the vacuum cleaner. I told him about my conversations with Maria. I repeated her words as best I could. "He's an important client. We can't afford to lose him." Then I got to the last note, the one about my hair. He wanted you to wear your hair down, Miller said, his voice neutral. He didn't look up from his notes. Yes. And you didn't. No, I said, I didn't. This was wrong. I felt the words rise in my chest, a quiet, powerful truth. I told him about walking into the suite that last time. The silence. The feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. And then, the photo frame on the polished desk. My voice started to shake. It was a picture of me. I whispered. I was on my knees, wiping the baseboard in the living room. The picture changed. It was me, aligning the water bottles. My back was to the camera. I took a sip of water. My hand trembled. It changed again and again. There were dozens of them. Me folding the towels. Me reaching for supplies in the hall. All the things he asked me to do. He was documenting it. I looked straight at the detective. There was a close-up of the clip in my hair. He was angry I hadn't obeyed. Detective Miller finally looked up. His eyes were dark and serious. There was no disbelief in them. Only a weary kind of confirmation. He had seen this before. Maybe not this exact story, but one like it. We found 3 cameras, Mrs. Costa, he said quietly. One in the main living area, hidden in a smoke detector. One in the hallway, inside a light fixture. And one in the master bathroom behind the mirror. The air left my lungs. The bathroom. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. The one place I thought was truly private, he had been there too. I waited for the sickness to pass. Then I looked at him, my voice barely audible. The pictures, the other pictures, does he have them? Are they somewhere else? It was the question that had kept me awake for nights. The fear that my humiliation was not contained to that one photo frame, that it was out in the world, stored on a server, posted on the internet for anyone to see. Miller's expression didn't change. His lawyers handed over his laptop and hard drives. Our forensic team is going through them now. It's a slow process. I can't give you a guarantee, Mrs. Costa. Men like Barnes are usually careful. They have ways of hiding things. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I need to be very clear with you about what happens next. Gregory Barnes has hired one of the best law firms in the state. They have already been in contact. They are building a defense. A defense for what? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. You have the pictures. You have the cameras. They will say it was for security, Miller said, his tone flat. They will say he's a high-profile man who needs to monitor his private residence. They will call his request eccentricities. They will call you a disgruntled employee looking for a payday. I stared at him. It was happening again. The same twisting of reality, but this time with lawyers and legal terms instead of corporate euphemisms. They will go through your employment record, he continued. They will look for any complaint, any mistake. They will try to paint you as unreliable, unstable. They will try to make a jury believe that you are overreacting, that you misunderstood. I felt the cold stone in my stomach again, but the anger beside it was now burning hot. I had spent my entire adult life being invisible, reliable, professional. I followed the rules. I did my job without complaint. And now, the one time I stood up for myself, that very nature was going to be used as a weapon against me. They wanted to make me a problem, the same way Maria did. I looked at my hands, resting on the metal table. They were a maid's hands, clean, but calloused from years of work. They had cleaned up other people's messes my whole life. I looked back at the detective. The fear was still there. It would always be there, but it was no longer in charge. He watched me, I said, my voice low and steady. He made me perform for him, and he recorded it. That is not security. That is not an eccentricity. It's a violation. A small nod from Miller. Yes, it is. So what do we do? I asked. You testify, he said simply. You sit in a courtroom and you tell your story, just like you told me, and we hope the jury believes you. I thought of the long, quiet hallway of the penthouse. I thought of the feeling of being exposed, of being watched. I thought of the woman in those photographs, on her knees, trying so hard to be perfect, to be invisible, while a camera silently captured her humiliation. He would not get away with it. I would not let him. I stood up. The room no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the start of something. Okay, I said, let's do it. Leaving the station, the city air felt sharp and clean in my lungs. The sun was bright. I walked past a store with a large plate glass window and saw my reflection. A woman in a gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a clip. She looked tired. She looked small against the backdrop of the city. But she wasn't hiding. Her eyes were clear, and she was looking straight ahead. She was ready for the fight. The click of the phone settling back into its cradle was the only sound in my small apartment. It was a loud, final sound. I had told Detective Miller I would testify. The words had left my mouth, and now they were out in the world, a promise I couldn't take back. I stood there in the quiet for a long time. I expected to feel something, relief maybe, or a surge of anger that would feel like strength. I felt none of that. Instead, a deep, heavy tiredness settled into my bones. It was the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. I had won the first battle, but all I had done was sign up for the war. The silence in my apartment had changed. Before, it was a comfort. It was the peaceful endpoint to a long day of hard work. Now it felt thin. It felt like the quiet of a place where someone was holding their breath. I walked into my bedroom. The laptop my son had given me for my birthday 2 years ago sat on my little desk. I rarely used it, but now my eyes went straight to the tiny black dot of the camera lens above the screen. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. My hands were shaking as I rummaged through the desk drawer. I found a roll of electrical tape, the kind I use for small repairs. With fumbling fingers, I tore off a small piece and pressed it firmly over the lens. Then I did it again, layering the tape until the dot was completely gone. It was a foolish thing to do. I knew that. But it was all I could control. This was what he had done to me. He had taken a safe place, my own home, and filled it with his shadow. I found myself checking the lock on my front door 3-4 times before I could try to rest. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, certain I'd heard a floorboard creak. I'd lie there, frozen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant groan of the city, and I would feel completely, utterly alone. He wanted me to be scared. Detective Miller was right. That was the point. The fear was the real weapon, and he had planted it right inside my head. The realization didn't make the fear go away, but it gave it a name. It gave it a shape. And anything with a shape could be fought. A few days later, a woman from the district attorney's office called. Her name was Ms. Chen. Her voice was brisk and professional, with no room for emotion. She asked me to come in to give a formal recorded statement. "It's a necessary step, Diana," she said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "We need your full account on the record before we can proceed." The drive to the county courthouse was a blur. The building was gray and imposing, a block of concrete and glass that looked like it had been built to withstand anything. It made me feel small, a maid walking into the halls of justice. It felt wrong, like I was wearing the wrong uniform for the job. They led me to a small windowless room. The walls were a pale, sterile green. There was a long table, a few chairs, and a small recording device in the center of the table. Miss Chen was there, along with Detective Miller. They didn't smile. Their faces were somber, professional. This was a workplace for them. For me, it was something else entirely. "Just tell us everything from the beginning," Miss Chen said, pressing a button on the recorder. A small red light blinked on. It was watching me. I took a breath. My voice, when it came out, was thin, a stranger's voice. I started with the first day I was assigned to the penthouse. I described my routine, the pride I took in my work, the invisibility I had perfected over 20 years. Then I got to the notes. As I spoke the words out loud, they sounded even more insane than they had in my head. He wanted the bath towels folded in a specific way, a triple fold, not the standard double fold the hotel used. He wanted the labels on all the water bottles in the mini fridge to face perfectly forward. All of them, Miss Chen wrote on a legal pad, her expression unreadable. Detective Miller just watched me, his gaze steady. I told him about the note that said I couldn't bring my cart, how I had to go back and forth down that long, empty hallway for every single supply. I explained the quiet shoes, how Maria told me to buy them with my own money. My stomach was in knots. I was describing the pieces of my dignity being chipped away one by one, and it was all being turned into cold, hard facts for a legal file. And then I said, my voice dropping. I had to stop and swallow. Then there was the note about my hair. The room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the recorder. It said I was to wear my hair down while I cleaned. Miss Chen stopped writing. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than professionalism in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something harder. It was anger. And you refused, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And that's when you found the digital frame. Yes. I described the pictures, me on my hands and knees wiping the floor, me reaching up to dust a high shelf, me turning around, my face caught in a moment of exhaustion. The pictures changed again and again. My own private horror movie, playing on a loop. When I was finished, a heavy kind of quiet filled the room. I felt hollowed out, like I had given them every part of me and there was nothing left. Miss Chen finally leaned forward. Diana, thank you. That took courage. Her voice was a little softer now. I need to be very clear about what happens next. Mr. Barnes has retained one of the top defense firms in the state. They have already filed a motion to have the case dismissed. My blood ran cold. Dismissed? But the cameras, the pictures. His lawyers are positioning this as a gross misunderstanding, she continued, her eyes holding mine. They aren't denying the cameras were there. They are claiming they were for security purposes. They are framing his notes not as demands, but as aesthetic preferences. That phrase, Maria's phrase, the one she had used to shut me down, to hear it again in this room, twisted into a legal defense, made me feel sick. It was happening all over again, the gaslighting, but this time it was wearing a $1,000 suit. They are going to paint you as a disgruntled employee, Ms. Chen said, her voice flat and hard. They'll say you were looking for a payday. They will try to tear you apart on the stand. They will go through your work history, your personal life, anything they can find to make you look unreliable. Are you prepared for that? I looked from her face to Detective Miller's. I saw the truth of her words in their expressions. This was the fight they had warned me about. Mr. Barnes wasn't just a phantom anymore. He was an army of lawyers, ready to destroy me to protect him. For a moment, the fear came rushing back. The urge to run, to hide, to take it all back and disappear again was overwhelming. I could feel the air leave my lungs. But then I thought of the pictures. My face, tired and unaware, his game, his control. I thought of the other maids, the ones who would come after me. I met Miss Chen's gaze. My own voice, when it came back, was steady. It was quiet, but it was mine. Yes, I said, I am. The silence in my apartment was different now. Before it had been a comfort, a quiet reward at the end of a long day. Now it was heavy. It felt like the silence in the penthouse suite, a waiting kind of quiet. I kept thinking I heard the faint electronic whir of a camera lens adjusting. I knew it was impossible. I knew I was alone. It didn't matter. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands moving through the familiar motions. On autopilot, but my eyes kept darting to the window, to the dark street below. Every passing headlight felt like a searchlight. He was gone from the hotel, but he wasn't gone from my head. That was the part I hadn't understood yet. He had taken a piece of my peace, and I didn't know if I would ever get it back. The next morning, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but it had the hotel's area code. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to them. A few minutes later, a message popped up. It was from Human Resources. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss my transition and offer support. Transition. The word felt cold and corporate, a way to describe being ripped out of your life. I didn't want their support. I wanted them to have supported me when I first came to Maria. My stomach in knots, telling her something was wrong. I called Detective Miller instead. Diana, he said, his voice tired but steady. Good to hear from you. The hotel called, I said, my voice small. HR, they want to meet. I heard him sigh on the other end of the line. It was a sound that carried the weight of 100 similar cases. Okay, listen to me. They're going to offer you money, a settlement. It will probably sound like a lot. It will come with a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. It means you can never talk about what happened. Not to the press, not to anyone. It means the case for you is over. I was quiet. Money. I thought of my bills, the rent on my small apartment, the constant low-grade worry that followed me every month. They're not doing it to be nice, Diana. he continued, his tone hardening slightly. They're doing it to protect themselves and their client. Barnes's legal team is already at work. They're filing motions to have the evidence from the suite suppressed. They're going to say you planted the photo frame. The air left my lungs. Planted it? Why would I do that? They'll invent a reason. They'll say you were a disgruntled employee looking for a payday. They will dig into your life, every job you've had, every person you've ever known. They will try to find one thing, anything, to make you look unstable or untrustworthy. That's their job. A coldness spread through me. It was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them trying to rewrite the story to make me the villain. What should I do? I whispered. That's not for me to say, Miller said. But I can tell you this. If you take the settlement, Barnes walks away clean. The criminal case gets a lot harder without its main witness. He'll go to another hotel in another city and he'll do it again. If you fight, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You'll need a lawyer, a good one. He gave me a name and a number, a woman who handled cases like mine. Pro bono, he said, if she believed in the case. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope. The name looked foreign and powerful on the cheap paper. The meeting was the next day. I chose to go. I needed to know what they would say, what they would do. I needed to see their faces. They didn't have me meet in Mr. Davies' office. They put me in a sterile, windowless conference room on the administrative floor. It smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and nothing else. There were two people waiting for me. A woman from HR named Susan, who had a practiced, sympathetic smile, and a man in a sharp suit who introduced himself as the hotel's legal counsel. Maria was not there. Mr. Davies was not there. It was just me and the machinery of the hotel. Diana, thank you for coming, Susan began, gesturing for me to take a seat. We want to first extend our deepest apologies for the unfortunate incident you experienced. It is not in keeping with the standards of this establishment. Unfortunate incident. The words were so small, so empty. The lawyer took over. He didn't smile. As you know, Mr. Barnes was a long-term, high-value guest. His behavior, while unusual, was not something we had prior knowledge of in this capacity. A lie. I knew it was a lie. They had knowledge. Maria had knowledge. She just chose to call it a preference. We are conducting a full internal review, Susan added quickly, and Maria is on indefinite leave pending its outcome. They were cutting her loose, sacrificing one part of the machine to save the rest. Then the lawyer slid a folder across the polished table. The hotel is prepared to offer you a comprehensive severance package, Diana. It includes a financial settlement of $100,000, as well as 6 months of paid therapy with a recommended professional. I stared at the number. In $100,000. It was more money than I had ever seen. It was a mountain. It was a new life. A life without worrying about the rent or the car breaking down or a medical bill. It was an escape. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. All I had to do was be silent. This is a gesture of goodwill, the lawyer said, his voice smooth. To help you move on and begin a new chapter, free from this entire affair. Free from it, as if a check could erase the feeling of his eyes on me, the memory of my own face staring back at me from that screen, as if it could give me back the safety of being invisible. My internal monologue, the one that had been screaming for weeks, went quiet. A strange calm settled over me. I looked at the two of them, Susan, with her worried, rehearsed expression, the lawyer, with his blank, unreadable face. They were the same as Maria. They were the system that allowed a man like Barnes to flourish. They watered the garden for him. They saw my silence as hesitation, as a negotiation. It's a very generous offer, Diana, Susan said softly. It would allow you to put all of this behind you. I thought about the other maids, the ones who might have been assigned to him before, or the ones who would be assigned to him at the next hotel, and the next. I thought about the woman who would be told to wear her hair a certain way or fold a towel just so, and who would feel that first flicker of wrongness and would be told she was overreacting. If I took this money, I would be paying for her silence too. I would become part of the machine. I pushed the folder back across the table. It made a soft, decisive sound in the quiet room. No, I said. The word was simple. It felt clean. The lawyer's expression didn't change. but a flicker of annoyance passed through his eyes. "I would urge you to reconsider, Miss Morales. This is a one-time offer." "It wasn't an unfortunate incident," I said, my voice low but clear. I looked directly at him. "It was a crime, and it wasn't unusual behavior. It was predatory. You can call it whatever you want in this room, but I know what it was." I stood up. My legs felt stronger than they had in weeks. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I'm not taking your money, and I won't be silent." I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my back straight. I walked down the hallway, past the closed doors of the administrative offices. I didn't take the staff elevator. I walked right to the main bank of elevators, the ones for the guests, and pressed the button for the lobby. When the doors opened, I stepped into the grand, sunlit space, the world of wealth and pristine surfaces. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to be invisible. I walked straight across the marble floor, my sensible work shoes clicking with every step, and out the front doors into the noise and the light of the city. I had the lawyer's name on a piece of paper in my pocket. It was time to make a phone call. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. I had said no to the money. The word felt small in my mouth when I'd said it to Mr. Davies, but it was the biggest thing I had ever done. It hung in the air of my small apartment, heavier than the silence. The hotel had called it paid administrative leave. It sounded official, a kindness, but it wasn't. It was a cage. My routine, the one that had held my life together for 15 years, was gone. No 5 a.m. alarm, no crisp uniform, no cart to stock, no rhythm of fold, wipe, and spray. My hands, usually busy, lay still in my lap. They felt useless. My apartment had never felt so quiet. It was different from the quiet in the penthouse. The quiet of Mr. Barnes's suite was a heavy, watching quiet. This was an empty quiet. It was just me in the space where my life used to be. Detective Miller had called the day after I refused the hotel's offer. His voice was flat, professional. "I hear you turned them down," he said. There was no judgment in it, just a statement of fact. "I did." A pause. "It's going to be a hard road, Diana. Barnes has a team of lawyers who are very good at what they do. They will try to make this about you, not him." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I think I already knew. "They'll dig your work history, your finances, your personal life, anything they can use to paint you as unreliable or greedy or worse." A coldness spread through my stomach, the same feeling I'd had when I saw my own face on that screen. He was still controlling things, even from a distance. He was still finding ways to get into my space, into my life. "I understand," I said. My voice was a whisper. "You'll need a lawyer of your own," Miller continued. "I can't recommend anyone officially, but there are victim advocacy groups. They can point you in the right direction." He gave me a number. I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt. The pen was shaking in my hand. For 2 days, the number sat on my kitchen counter. I would walk past it, my eyes snagging on the neat blue digits. It felt like a doorway. I knew if I walked through it, I could never go back. The money had been an escape hatch, a chance to disappear and pretend none of it had ever happened. But it wouldn't have been real. The memory of those photos, of that feeling of being watched, would have followed me. It would have been a different kind of cage. On the 3rd day, I made the call. The lawyer's name was Sarah Jenkins. Her office was in a small old brick building downtown, the kind with a slow elevator that groaned and shuddered. It was a world away from the polished marble and silent efficiency of the hotel. She didn't look like the lawyers on television. She was about my age, with tired lines around her eyes and hair pulled back in a simple, messy bun. She wore a plain gray sweater, not a power suit. Her office was cluttered with stacks of paper and law books. It felt real. It felt human. She listened. I told her everything, right from the first note about the towels. My voice was steady. Recounting it felt different now. It wasn't just a confusing series of events anymore. It was evidence. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. Her eyes were sharp. "They offered you $100,000, she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you said no?" "Yes." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the messy desk. "Diana, I need you to understand what this means. Detective Miller was right. They will come after you. They will say you're a disgruntled employee. They will say you're trying to extort a wealthy man. They will take your entire life and put it under a microscope, looking for a single flaw they can use to discredit you. She used words like discovery and deposition. I just nodded. What I heard was, they will try to break you. And the photos, she continued, her voice softening just a little. The police have the frame, but we have no way of knowing if he has copies, if he stored them online, if he sent them to anyone. We have to proceed as if those images are out there, somewhere. The air left my lungs. That was the real fear, the one that kept me up at night. The thought of my face, my body, in the privacy of what I thought was an empty room, being somewhere I couldn't see. On a screen, in the dark, I looked down at my own hands, the knuckles white. So what do? We fight, Sarah said simply. We file a civil suit. We demand every piece of electronic equipment he owns. We make it so public and so messy, the settling with you becomes better for his reputation than fighting you. Her gaze was intense. But you have to be ready. When you walk out of this office, you are no longer just a maid. You are a plaintiff. And they will treat you like the enemy. I thought about the uniform hanging in my closet. Invisible. That's what I had always tried to be. Now I had to be the opposite. I had to be seen. I had to be loud. I felt completely alone. I left her office and walked for hours. The city felt different. The faces of strangers felt like potential threats. Every security camera on every building felt like his camera. I found myself looking over my shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs, and he had made the whole world feel like his penthouse. When I finally got home, an envelope was sticking out of my mail slot. It was thick, creamy paper, expensive paper. My name and address were typed. There was no return address, just a postmark from a town I'd never heard of. My hands were trembling as I tore it open. It wasn't a letter, it was a legal document. The letterhead was from a law firm with names and that sounded like old money. The language was dense and threatening. It spoke of defamatory statements, tortious interference, and frivolous claims. It demanded I cease and desist all communication about Mr. Barnes. It said any legal action on my part would be met with an aggressive countersuit for damages to his reputation. It was a warning, a promise. But then I saw the last page. Attached to the back was a single sheet of glossy photo paper. It was a picture. It was of me, standing in my own kitchen from a few days ago. I was staring at the grocery receipt on the counter, the one with the detective's number on it. The photo was taken from outside through the window at night. Grainy, distant. But it was me, unmistakably me. A sound came out of my throat, a choked, desperate gasp. The paper fell from my fingers. He wasn't just a memory. He wasn't just a defendant in a future lawsuit. He was still watching. This was wrong. This was the answer to my defiance. This was his way of telling me he could still reach me, that he was everywhere. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The empty quiet of my apartment was gone. It was a watching quiet again. I felt the walls closing in, the air turning thick and cold. I wanted to run, to scream, to disappear. The fear was a physical thing, a hand closing around my throat. Then something else rose up through the terror. It was hot and sharp. It was anger. He thought this would scare me into silence. He thought this picture would be the thing that finally broke me, that would send me running back to the hotel to take their money and sign their papers. He was wrong. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't from fear anymore. I knelt and picked up the photograph. I looked at my own captured image, my own worried face. He thought this was his power. He thought he owned this image of me. He thought he owned me. I walked back to the phone, the legal threat in one hand and the photograph in the other. I dialed Sarah Jenkins' number. It rang twice before she picked up. Sarah Jenkins. I took a breath. My voice, when it came out, was low and clear. It didn't tremble at all. "This is Diana," I said. "They sent me a letter and a picture. We need to move faster." The photograph was glossy, professional. The paper felt thick and wrong in my trembling hands. It wasn't a hotel photo, taken from a hidden camera in a sterile suite. It was a picture of me, in my own home. I was sitting on my old floral sofa, the one that had been my mother's. A mug was cradled in my hands, steam rising from it in a soft curl. I was wearing my gray sweats and a faded t-shirt. My hair was messy. My face was tired. It was a picture of me from 2 nights ago, after I'd gotten home from meeting with the lawyer's office. I remembered that exact moment. I had been thinking about the settlement offer, about the NDA, about the feeling of being watched. I had been right. He was still watching me. The air left my lungs in a rush, a silent gasp that made my chest ache. I dropped the photo and the letter onto my small coffee table as if they were burning my skin. The picture landed face up. My own unguarded face stared back at me, a ghost in my own living room. A coldness spread from my chest outward, reaching the tips of my fingers and toes. My apartment, my small, safe world, was no longer safe. It was compromised. It was another one of his rooms. I felt the walls closing in, the single window in my living room suddenly feeling like a giant dark eye. My hands started shaking. I wrapped my arms around myself, a useless gesture. The letter from his lawyers was filled with cold, formal words. Cease and desist. Baseless allegations. Defamation of character. It was all noise. The real message was the photograph. It said, I can see you. I can get to you wherever you are. He had invaded my workplace. Now he had invaded my home. This was wrong. This was more than wrong. My first impulse was to run, to just grab my purse and walk out the door and never come back. But where would I go? He was a millionaire, a man who could hire lawyers to threaten me and someone else to follow me, to point a camera through my window and take my picture without me ever knowing. Running felt impossible. He had all the money in the world. I had a 2-week paycheck from the hotel and a dwindling savings account. I felt completely alone. The police had been professional but distant. It was a hotel matter, a corporate problem. This letter, this picture, it made it a personal one. It was a direct threat. My breath hitched. I stood up and walked to the window, my legs unsteady. I pulled the curtain shut. The cheap fabric did little to make me feel secure. He already had the picture. It was done. Was someone out there right now, watching me pull the curtain? My stomach twisted. I backed away from the window, my eyes darting around my own apartment. The familiar objects, the worn armchair, the chipped vase on the bookshelf, the stack of mail on the counter, all looked alien. Had he put a camera in here too, like in the hotel room? The thought was so violating it almost made me sick. No, I had to think. Panicking was what he wanted. The note, the picture, the legal jargon, it was all designed to scare me into silence, to make me drop the whole thing and crawl back into a hole. I thought of Maria, her face a mask of polite dismissal. Don't make this a problem, Diana. I thought of Mr. Davies, his initial shock turning so quickly to damage control. We'd like to offer you a settlement. They all wanted me to be quiet, to take the money and disappear, to let Mr. Gregory Barnes continue on with his life as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't stolen a part of me. The picture on the table caught my eye again, my tired, private face, a face he had no right to see, let alone capture and use as a weapon. A new feeling began to bubble up through the cold fear. It was hot and sharp. It was anger, a deep, solid knot of anger that settled in my gut. He would not win. He would not chase me out of my own home, out of my own life. My hands were still shaking, but now it was from adrenaline, not just fear. I took a deep, steadying breath. I needed help, not the police, not yet. I needed my own weapon. I needed a lawyer. I walked back to the table, avoiding the photograph, and picked up my phone. My fingers fumbled as I found the number I'd been given. The card was crisp and white. Anya Sharma, attorney at law. The woman who had referred me said she was the best, that she didn't back down. I hoped she was right. The phone rang 3 times before a calm, professional voice answered. Anya Sharma's office. Hello, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. My name is Diana. I was told to call Miss Sharma. I have a legal matter. One moment, please. I waited, my heart pounding against my ribs. I stared at the closed curtain, imagining a lens staring back. The silence on the line stretched on. Maybe she was too busy. Maybe this wasn't important enough. Then, the voice came back on the line, warmer this time. Diana, this is Anya Sharma. How can I help you? The dam broke. The words came spilling out of me, quiet and frantic. I was a maid at the Grand Atlas Hotel. There was a guest, Mr. Barnes. He was taking pictures of me. Hidden cameras. The hotel fired my manager and put me on leave. They offered me money, but I said no, and now he sent me a letter. A letter? Miss Sharma's voice was even, patient. It was grounding. From his lawyers. A cease and desist, but that's not all. In the envelope, there was a photo. I had to stop, to swallow past the lump in my throat. It was of me, in my apartment. He's having me followed. He's still watching me. There was a pause on the other end. For a second, I felt that old, familiar dread. The dread that I wouldn't be believed. Then Miss Sharma spoke, and her tone was completely different. The warmth was gone, replaced by something hard and focused. Okay, Diana, listen to me very carefully. This is a classic intimidation tactic. It's a serious one, but it has a purpose. It's designed to make you feel exactly how you feel right now, terrified, isolated, and powerless. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. She believed me. First, she continued, go and check that your doors and windows are locked. Do it right now while you're on the phone with me. I did as she said, my phone pressed to my ear. I walked through my small apartment, checking the flimsy lock on the front door, the latch on the living room window, the one in my bedroom. They were all secure. It didn't make me feel any safer. They're locked, I said. Good. Now, the letter and the photograph. Do you still have them? Yes, on my coffee table. I want you to find a large envelope or a plastic bag. I want you to handle them as little as possible, preferably by the edges, and seal them inside. We may be able to get fingerprints from the photo, though I doubt they were that careless. Still, we preserve the evidence, always. Her instructions were a lifeline. They were actions, something to do other than sit and be afraid. I found a large Ziploc bag in my kitchen drawer and carefully slid the letter and the photograph inside, trying not to look at my own face. I've done it, I told her. Excellent. Diana, what he has done is move this from a civil harassment case into criminal territory. This is witness intimidation. It's stalking. This is the act of a man who is not only guilty, but also arrogant enough to think he can't be touched. He just handed us a gift. A gift? It felt like a curse. I don't feel like he gave me a gift, I whispered. I feel like he's in my house. I know, she said, her voice softening just a little. I understand. But in a courtroom, this photo is proof. It proves his pattern of behavior extends beyond the hotel. It proves his obsession with you. It proves he will go to illegal lengths to silence you. This is how we fight him. Not just for the violation in the hotel, but for this too. She told me to stay put. That she was sending a courier to my apartment to pick up the package. She told me not to answer the door for anyone else. She told me we would meet first thing in the morning at her office to file a police report and a request for a restraining order. He wants you to be scared, Miss Sharma said, her voice firm again. He wants you to be silent. We are going to be the opposite. We are going to be loud. After we hung up, the silence of my apartment returned. It was still heavy, still threatening, but something inside me had shifted. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my stomach, but the anger was burning brighter. A gift. I walked through my apartment again, this time looking at it with new eyes. I looked at the air vents, the smoke detector, the back of the cheap digital clock on my nightstand. I was looking for a tiny black lens, a pinprick. I didn't find anything, but the act of looking was an act of defiance. It was me taking my home back, inch by inch. He had made a mistake. He thought a picture would break me. He thought seeing myself through his eyes, vulnerable and unaware, would send me scurrying into the dark. Instead, it showed me exactly what I was fighting for. My life, my small, quiet, private life, and I was not going to lose.